Right. So at first, let me start with block one, where we're going to take up the 18th century novel. That is when it actually started to gain popularity, and rise and growth of novel from this period onwards. Then we're going to take up two of the writer's major works, or you call them as novels during that period. That is Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Okay, and another one is Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews. So in block one, we are going to learn about the rise of 18th century novel, and I mean the background of the novel, the origin of novel and its background, and then moving on to the rise and growth, and then the two major writers of this period, the prominent writers Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe and Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews. Then in the first unit, that is of the block one, where we're going to learn about types of novels in unit one, and then the novels like, the adventurous novels, picaresque novel, gothic novel, epistolary novel, and also we are going to look into the some of the prominent authors of this period, Jonathan Swift, and of course Daniel Defoe, which is also prescribed, then Samuel Richardson, Henry Fielding. Again, Henry Fielding has also been prescribed for us in Unit 1. And next, moving on to the second unit, we are going to take up Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, where we're going to look into the historical background, then also the summary of it, the chapters from 1 to 20, and the characterization, the thematic analysis of the novel, form and style, then some of the main aspects of that particular write-up. Right. Then coming to the third unit, we are going to look into the Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews and its introduction along with the preface, and also the summary of all the four books, all the four volumes of the books. Right. And then we will also look into the character analysis of Joseph Andrews and also the analysis of the novel. Right. Moving on to the block two, what is it we're going to take up in this? The 19th century novel, that is Victorian fiction. Now, earlier, I mean, the first unit is all something which talks about the 18th century, and the block two, which talks about the 19th century novel, and in which we're going to talk about the, um, the Victorian fiction, that is the types of narrative fiction during this period, elements of fiction, then the origins of the novel of this period, then rise of the English novel of this period, and the pioneers of the English novel, and the various types of novels of the 19th century. That is the kind of novels which are exclusively have been shown up during this period. Then coming to Unit 5, we have this prescribed literary work of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. So here we're going to talk about the background of this, and then Austen and the Romantic tradition, then the early life and works of Jane Austen, then a bit about the Pride and Prejudice, that is the analysis of this, then the characterization, the themes of this Pride and Prejudice, and the feminist reading of Pride and Prejudice in feminine perspective. So we're going to look into it. Then coming to the sixth unit of the same second block, that is Charles Dickens' Hard Times. So we're going to look into the works of Charles Dickens. And then here we're going to look into the biographical note of Charles Dickens, and hard times and summary and an overview, and also a bit of critical commentary about it, then the themes and the issues, then the technical features, and also the style and language of this particular write-up and the literature, that is the novel, and then the style and language, imagery, and symbolism of Charles Dickens' Hard Times. Then moving on to the block three. So what are we going to look into this? I mean, what are we going to learn from this block 3? That is, it covers 20th century fiction. So in this, what are we going to learn? That is the modernist novel and how the French had an influence on modernist novel. We're going to look into the mindset or the kind of the influence on the modernist novel. Then how the writings were experimented with language and style. This kind of an experimentation, we're going to look into it and also understand it's also called as the conflictual modernism. Why is it so? And the women modernists and the non-European modernists. So these are the things which are going to take up in the 7th unit of block 3. Then coming to the 8th unit of block 3, we have Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. So we're going to learn a bit about the background of this, her write-up, and about the author, historical background, and modernism in literature and art. How is this been reflected in literature and art, the modernism? Then another new aspect, new element called stream of consciousness. This is very much an important aspect during this period. And we have plot summary of the novel and then themes of the novel, Mrs. Dalloway, and its interpretation and point of view. Then moving on to the 9th unit, so Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So this is the novel which we're going to look into it, the plot and summary of the novel, and the critical reception, how it was taken up. Then the post-colonial understanding. I mean, this is the work which reflects a lot about the post-colonial understanding and issues of race. And also some heart of darkness, what exactly it means there. Then existentialism and modernism. So these are certain aspects which we are going to look into this unit 9 of block 3. Then coming to block 4. So this is block 4, where we're going to learn a lot about the 20th century American fiction. So basically, we're going to look into the intro of what American fiction during that period, that is the 20th century, and who were the precursors to 20th century American fiction and the early 20th century American fiction. Then we also have the post-World War II, the fiction which has come up after the World War II. Okay. And uh, then we also have the postmodern American fiction. Then another important kind of works we get to see is African American women's fiction of 20th century. Right. Now, again, we have another unit, that is 11th unit, where we have Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Okay, this is Scott's Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, where we are going to look into the novel, the summary of the novel, and how the character analysis has been done. Also, the analysis of the novel and the themes of the novel. Right. Next, we have The Color Purple, which is written by Alice Walker. So we're going to look into the intro of this, The Color Purple, written by Alice Walker, and also the summary of the novel and the art of characterization, how it has been done, the characterization and character analysis. Then we also look into the analysis of the novel. Right. Now, the last one, which is block 5. What are we going to learn in this? So in block 5, we're going to look into the contemporary Indian English fiction, right? After all these 4 American and British literature, we come into the introduction to Indian English fiction. Now, here we're going to look into the background and the introduction again. Then also, we're going to talk a bit about and learn about the Indian novelists of pre as well as post-independence period. That is, the writers of the pre and the post, and writers of this period who have actually contributed for this English fiction, specifically English fiction. Now, Indian novelists of contemporary period and also the beginning of contemporary Indian novel. And then we have feminism in contemporary Indian fiction and the lesbian and gay themes, crime fiction, and detective novels of Indian fiction, Indian English fiction. Right. And we also have the kind of novels which have come up under Indian English fiction in Unit 13 of Block 5. Right. So here we're going to learn about the campus novel in India, the various kinds, like the graphic novel in India. Then the concern for the subalterns, who are called as subalterns and what is their concern about it. Then we are going to look into the eco-criticism and anthropological concerns. Then we have the historical sense, then Indian diaspora novelists. Right. Now, in the same block, and we also have a prescribed novel, The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, right? It is Unit 14. So we are going to talk about its critical reception, how it has been taken up by the people, the readers, the summary of the novel, The God of Small Things. We also look into the major characters in the novel, the plot structure, critical understanding, and some of the experiments with narrative technique. We all know as it went on, I mean, after some point of time, especially towards the modernistic era, people started experimenting and coming up with various novel ways of writing. Then we have the feminist understanding. Then also, we're going to learn about the use of magic realism. Then we after this, we also have post-colonial approach to understand the god of small things. And then trauma theory. Okay, what is meant by trauma theory? And then the eco-critical study of the god of small things. Right. Next, in Unit 15, this is also a prescribed, given write-up for us to learn. That is Amitav Ghosh, the shadow lines. So again, the same thing here. We're going to look into the summary of the novel and the major characters, the plot structure, critical understanding, post-colonial understanding, and revisioning history, refashioning self, and also understanding representation of women characters. Okay, and understanding nation from diaspora location. Right. So these are some of the aspects we are going to, I mean, I've just given you an overview of the, or you can even call it as a gist of what we are going to learn in these, say, for example, 6 days. I mean, starting from today to Saturday, we have our classes. So probably each day I'll be completing at least one block. So today we're going to start with the first block. So before I start, let me just share the screen. And also, this being a counseling session, and we are academic counselors here, so I would suggest you come up with, a kind of a idea as to what is being taught in the class. I mean, you have to take up a prior reading to it, and then maybe after sitting through the session, you will understand it much better. So let me share the screen for the first block. Right. I hope the screen is visible. Right. This is the English fiction, Sem 6 by Dr. Revati here. And so here we are going to learn about the 18th century novel, its rise and growth, and Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, the novel, Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews. Right. Now, what is a novel? We all know novel, we would have read quite a number of novels, but let us look into what exactly it meant and when did it begin to showcase? I mean, when did it actually start? A novel is a long work of narrative fiction, normally written in prose form and which is typically published as a book. The term for the novel in most European language is Roman, which suggests its closeness to the medieval romance. The English name is from the Italian novella, meaning a little new thing. Romances and novellas, short tales in prose, were predecessors of the novel. So, since the 18th century, the term novella or novelle in German and has been used in English and other European languages to describe a long, short story or a short novel. Now, the first English novel is said to be Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe in 1799 and his Moll Flanders 1722. So basically, let me just give you some intro about this. So novel as it's a literary genre. Now enjoyed the highest level of glory in the 18th century. Now, as I already told you, the authors, namely Defoe, Richardson, Fielding, that is Henry Fielding, and Sterne, contributed significantly to the development of English novel. They influenced the writers who came after them. The 18th century coincided with the Industrial Revolution, which significantly contributed to the rise of the novel, and that too with the invention of the printing machine. Now, the chain effects of Industrial Revolution improved people's life and living standard. So, the rise of the educated middle class people further increased the reading public, which correspondingly led to demand of novels for reading. Now, books such as Don Quixote, Decameron, Motted, Arthur, and Pilgrim's Progress laid the foundations for the development of the novel, and such as Pamela, Joseph Andrews, Tristram Shandy, and Robinson Crusoe were some of the notable books that became famous in the 18th century. However, novels continued to evolve in the 19th and 20th century, giving rise to different genres or classes of novels. So the 18th century literature was characterized by the spirit of. Now, I am getting into the factors which actually led to this rise of novel in the 18th century. Now, as we all know, it was the spirit of realism which has actually promoted this kind of growth. And realism, reason, intellect, and correctness were the main characteristics of 18th century literature. It is also considered as a product of an intellectual milieu shaped by the 17th century philosophers as Descartes and Locke, who insisted upon the importance of individual experience. The reading public wanted to see their lives reflected in a literary form because we know the novels of that period actually were quite realistic in nature, and they were literally like the mirrors of the society, show putting up the real lives of the people. Hence, they wanted to see their lives reflected in a literary form. So, novelists like Defoe and Richardson were writing about the struggles of middle class people and using experiences that were clearly recognizable to the reading public. They represented characters in particular places and times with familiar naming. Subjects were relevant to 18th century concern. And another important factor which led to the rise of the novel is availability of printed materials. Now, in the 18th century, the appearance of newspapers and magazines attracted a large number of readers from the middle class. Now, these new readers had little interest in the romances and the tragedies which had interested the upper class. Thus, the need of new type of literature that would express the new ideas of the 18th century rose, and this new type of literature was none but novel. Another point here, the factor was rise of middle class. As we all know, because of the industrial revolution, and there was a kind of a, the many aspects, there was a growth of middle class. So, an equally important element in the rise of the novel was economic. So, economic, as because the industrialization increased, a middle class developed rapidly in England. With the increasing middle class came more education and leisure time, both ingredients in the popularity of the novel, as more people had time to read and more money to buy books. The role of women. Now, in the 18th century, women of upper classes and the middle classes could not participate in the activities of men. They could not engage themselves in administration, politics, hunting, drinking, etc. So it was more or less like a male dominated society. Hence, in their leisure time, they used to read novels. Then, decline of drama. The decline of drama also contributed to the rise of the novel in the 18th century. In the 18th century, drama lost its fame that it had in Elizabethan age. It did not remain an influential literary form. So its place was filled by the English novel after 1740. So the decline of drama led to the rise of the English novel. Circulating libraries. So they were in fact mobile libraries. A circulating library is quite similar to the public libraries that we have today. People were able to borrow a limited number of books for a set length of time, and they were subject to fines if items were lost, damaged, or returned after the due date. Likewise, circulating libraries stocked a wide range of items, including non-fiction, fiction, and eventually children's books. Right, these are some of the novels where you can see them here on the slide. The rise of the novel, then we have the origins of the English novel, and before novels. Right. And it's almost like 250 years old in England and embattled from the start. Its rise to preeminence has been very striking. Now, what were the features of this? So, realism and drama of individual consciousness has precedence over external drama. Now, focus on experience of the individual as subject matter. Exploration of individual consciousness and perception. These were some of the features of this novel. Now, realism. So, synonymous with veracity. Now, denial of fictionality. So, it was a kind of the, more or less, it was very true to an individual. So, denial of fictionality, particularity of description, photographic attention to detail. So, it was like very, very, I mean, very specific, and it was like totally true. I mean, it looked absolutely very much close to the reality. So it was like, verisimilitude. Okay. Rejection of fabulous imaginings, and idealism of romances. Then subject matter, if you look into the subject matter, significant choices in subject matter, appearance of probability in character, setting, and event, logical cause and effect sequencing, There was a solidity of detail in order to achieve the reader's willing suspension of disbelief. Focus on middle class protagonists. So mostly they were focusing on the working class or the middle class, and that's how it just grew to fame and it gained popularity. Right. Some of the major writers of this period, prominent and famous, they're Daniel Defoe, Henry Fielding, Sterne, and then you have Richardson and Jonathan Swift. Now, these are some of the novels written by them. Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe, Moll Flanders, and then you have Tristram Shandy, then Pamela, then you have Tom Jones, then Gulliver's Travels. Now, Richardson and Fielding created a consciousness among readers and potential writers that a significant and lasting form had come about, and the literary careers could be built upon the genre. Now, these are some of the kinds of novels which we can see during this period. There were epistolary novel, realistic novel, philosophical novel, epic novel, and experimental novel. And Bildungsroman is another kind of a novel which we could get to see. These were the different types of novels, right? Now, epistolary novel enjoyed its greatest popularity in England and France from the mid 1700s to the end of the century. Now, plot here is advanced by letters or journal entries of one or more characters. It's epistolary, in fact, is like a story which is narrated with the help of devices such as letters, journal entries, and other documents. So that's called an epistolary. Now, these are some of the examples of such kind of a writing. Montesquieu in France, that is Letters per Saints. It's a kind of a very rich, evocative novel in letters, tells the story of two Persian noblemen who have left their country. Next, we have Richardson's Pamela. It's one of the first example of the epistolary novel, the first mature novel to be written in English. Then later, we also have Rousseau's La Novelle Heloise and La Close, Les Liaisons Dangerouses, and Goethe, The Sorrows of Young Werther, Foscolos, Les Ultime Lettres di Jacopo Otis. Right. Then coming to the realistic novel. What exactly is this kind of a novel? Realistic, the word itself suggests that it is close to the realistic aspect, true to itself. So, Robinson Crusoe, written by Daniel Defoe, and regarded as the first novel in English, a fictional autobiography by a first person narrator. This device, presenting an account of supposedly factual events, is known as a false document and gives a realistic fame to the story. First of the first of it's an endless series of novels in all world literatures up to modern times. Now, Gothic novels. Gothic novel is kind of a, I mean, it's not very realistic because it's all to do with fictitious kind of a thing where you have a scary kind of stories in it. So they combine fiction, romanticism, horror, and touches of the supernatural. They were over dramatic and not necessarily realistic. They relied heavily on suspense. People considered trashy and lowbrow because they were the least realistic and solely for entertainment. Now, society considered them a waste of time and energy, possibly even corruptive. Now, these are some of the novels, the Gothic novels, which you come across during that period. The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, then Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, Dracula by Bram Stoker. Right. Now, there's again another, the philosophic satiric novel, The Gulliver's Travel. A satire on human nature, a parody of the traveler's tales, and a philosophical novel, unique in England. And then coming to the epic novel. So, Tom Jones by Henry Fielding. So, this is actually a comic epic novel by English playwright and novelist Henry Fielding. It's a Bildungsroman and a picaresque novel. Fielding presents a panorama of contemporary British life, drawing characters from many different classes and occupation. Now, it's a kind of a comic romance rooted in the narrative conventions of romance and epic. Unheroic hero, ordinary person, omniscient, meddling third person narrator. You have wide social range topics, direct show and discussion of narrative devices, and which actually paved way for Charles Dickens, George Eliot, and William Thackeray. Now, coming to another novel, which is called experimental type of novel, where you have Tristram Shandy. The novel is a satire of the autobiography genre and a commentary on the nature of fiction and the act of writing. And it is one of the greatest comic novels in England, English. Now, a forerunner for many modern narrative devices is a stream of consciousness, self reflection, and modernist and postmodernist writing. Now, what is this Bildungsroman, a German word for novel of education or novel of formation? So, a novel which traces the spiritual, moral, psychological, or social development and growth of the main character from childhood to maturity. For example, the hero or the heroine leaves home for a real or metaphoric journey due to some form of loss or discontent. Now, it actually explores the manners in which the protagonist develops morally and psychologically. And the process of maturity is long, arduous, and gradual. And in the process, there might be clash between the protagonist's needs and desires and the views and judgments of social order. Now, for this, if I would like to quote an example, it would be almost all 18th century English novels can be considered as Bildungs, Bildungsroman. Okay. Robinson Crusoe is certainly a good one, and Pamela is another good example for it. Right. Let us move on to the prescribed novel of this first unit, that is Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. So, before that, let me just give you a brief bio of Robinson Crusoe. Uh, Daniel Defoe. So, born as Daniel Defoe, founder of English novel, and his masterpiece being Robinson Crusoe. He was born into a butcher's family, son of James Foe, a tallow chandler, and he was uh, a prolific writer and had at least 198 pen names. And when you talk about his novel, Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe was written in 1719. The public thought that it was a true story and that the events had really happened because that is how the way that the story is written. It's in fact a fictional autobiography of the castaway. A castaway who spends 28 years on a remote tropical island near Trinidad, encountering cannibals, captives, and mutineers before being rescued. Now, here, Robinson is not a hero, but an everyman, a wanderer to become a pilgrim. By doing so, I mean, a promised land on a, he lands on a promised land on a desolate island. Robinson becomes closer to God, not through listening to sermons in a church, but through spending time alone amongst nature with only a Bible to read. Therefore, central concern is the Christian notion of providence. Right. Now, before we move on to the next author, let me just give you some information about uh, Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Now, the character of Robinson Crusoe was partly inspired by the life of Alexander Selkirk, a Scottish sailor who was dropped on an uninhabited island off the coast of Chile after arguing with his captain in 1704. When he was discovered 4 years later, he was dressed in goat skins and had gone somewhat crazy. So many details used in Robinson Crusoe were taken from Selkirk's memoir. Now, if you look into the summary of this, now Robinson Crusoe growing up in a middle class family in the northeastern city of York, Robinson he feels bored and restless, dreaming of a life of travel and adventure. Then he plans on making a living as a sailor. But his father takes him aside and seriously cautions him against this idea. The best life, he says, is one of middle class comfort and predictability. Now, understanding the soundness of his father's advice, but still thrilled by the prospect of travel and adventure, Crusoe jumps at the opportunity to take his first boat voyage from Hull to London. He experiences a series of increasingly severe storms. Eventually, they are forced to abandon their ship and row to the shore in a lifeboat. The captain advises Crusoe that this is a warning from God. He should listen to his father and abandon his plans to become a merchant sailor. Now, despite these forebodings, Crusoe decides to go on a voyage to the West African coast with a captain he befriends in London. Now, he sells toys and trinkets in exchange for gold dust, turning 40 pounds into 300 on his first voyage. Hooked on these easy profits, he continues traveling to Africa as a trader even after his friend, the captain, dies. On one voyage, Crusoe's ship is overtaken by Moroccan pirates and he is sold as a slave. One of his duties as a slave is to catch fish. He uses this as an opportunity to escape along with another slave, a young boy named Ziori. Crusoe and Ziori travel the African coast until they spot a European ship. The ship is Portuguese and its captain takes them aboard and treats them well, offering them free passage to Brazil. In Brazil, the captain helps Crusoe set up a small sugar and tobacco plantation using the limited money he still has, and then I mean the amount which has been he tries to make by selling Ziori as a slave. Now, Crusoe works hard on his plantation for a few years and starts to grow prosperous. When a group of other plantation owners approaches Crusoe with a plan to buy slaves from West Africa, he is unable to turn down the adventure. Before they get very far, they encounter a terrible storm that blows them northwest. When the ship strikes a sandbank, they abandon it for fear that the powerful waves will break it to pieces. Crusoe just barely manages to make it to the shore of a nearby island alive. Now he spends a terrified night in a tree, and in the morning he sees the wreck of his ship not far off and realizes that he is the sole survivor. Quickly gets to work bringing back whatever clothes and provisions he can. But the ship is still in good condition and he finds plenty of supplies, guns, gunpowder, biscuits, canvas sails, money, clothes, and building materials, and even a dog and two cats. After bringing everything on shore, Crusoe gets to work building shelter and exploring the island. Although the island seems to be uninhabited and free of any predators, he painstakingly erects a barricade around a small cave he's discovered. He eventually builds himself a second shelter further inland. And he stays here for years, cultivating crops, domesticating goats, and the goats that he finds on the island, and generally learning how to make everything he needs from scratch, from pottery and cheese to a pipe, clothing, and an umbrella. Now, he has ample time to reflect on his life. He realizes that his own mistakes led to his shipwreck. He also notes how lucky he has been to have had so much help in his life to have been able to make use of the ship and to be on an island with plentiful food and water. He concludes that his being stranded in is a part of God's plan. Now he passes 15 years in this way. One day, while exploring the island, he is shocked to discover a single human footprint on the beach. Now, in a panic, he returns to his shelter and makes sure that it is fortified and his guns are ready. Increasingly paranoid, he loses sleep and takes extra precaution not to draw any attention to himself. He soon discovers the footprints belongs to cannibals who come over from the mainland in order to sacrifice their victims. They typically do this on the opposite end of the island, so Crusoe simply had not encountered them. Now, after discovering human remains around a fire, Crusoe is so disgusted that he plans to kill as many of the cannibals as he can. After several years of planning, he eventually cools off and decides against this course of action. He realizes that it's not his place to judge them and that doing so would probably be suicidal in any case. He gradually returns to his former way of living, being a bit more cautious and keeping a lookout for incoming canoes. Several years later, he's surprised to find that a canoe full of cannibals and their prisoners has landed about 400 meters from his hut. As he's observing them, one of the prisoners breaks free and runs for it. Crusoe decides to help this prisoner, directing him to a hiding place. Shooting one of his pursuers and giving the escaped man a sword, which he quickly kills the other with the okay. So he kills him actually. The escapee is forever grateful to Crusoe. Crusoe names him Friday after the day his life was saved, referring to him as my man Friday. Over the course of several years, Crusoe teaches him English and converts him to Christianity. While Crusoe has Friday call him master and thinks of him as a slave, their relationship is friendly and they both seem to respect each other. Crusoe learns from Friday what his earlier observations had suggested. The mainland is not so far away, but they would need a large boat to reach it. He also learns that 17 Europeans were shipwrecked near Friday's tribe and have been living here there together with the natives of for some years. While the two of them are working on building a boat big enough to reach the mainland, they see another group of canoes approaching. Now, this time, the cannibals have brought over one of the stranded Europeans as a prisoner and, and thought of him being eaten is too much for Crusoe to bear. Now, he and Friday charge the cannibals with guns blazing, killing all but two or three who escaped in their boat. They find another prisoner tied up in one of the abandoned canoes and are surprised to learn that it is Friday's father. Crusoe strikes a deal with the shipwrecked European in which he and Friday's father will return to the mainland in the boat that Crusoe and Friday have just finished. They'll then return with the other stranded Europeans so that they can all escape together. The Spaniard and Friday's father set off. While Crusoe is waiting for them to return, he sees an English ship moored off the island and a small boat approaching. Three people in the boat appear to be prisoners. Crusoe approaches these prisoners after their captors have fallen asleep and learns that they are a captain and officers of a ship whose sailors have mutinied. Crusoe and Friday kill or imprison the mutineers, then help the captain retake the ship after killing the leader of the mutiny. They leave the mutineers on the uninhabited island and sail back to England. Now, Crusoe visits the captain's window. So he visits captain's widow, who still has his money after 28 years. He finds that his mother and father have died, but his two sisters have married and had children. In need of money, he goes to Lisbon to see if he can find the Portuguese captain who rescued him. Remarkably, he does, and even more remarkably, he finds that his plantation in Brazil has made him incredibly rich. Afraid of traveling by sea, Crusoe decides to go from Lisbon to Calais on horseback, riding through the Pyrenees mountains in the winter along with Friday and some other travelers. He is attacked by a band of ravenous wolves. Struggling to fend them off with their rifles, Crusoe comes up with a plan to light them on fire with gunpowder, which finally succeeds in either killing them or scaring them off. Finally, arriving back in London with his fortune, Crusoe shares his money with his nephews and the captain's widow. He also marries and has children of his own, though he never describes his family in any detail. Still feeling restless, Crusoe decides to go visit his plantation in Brazil and to see what his island is like. He hints that the shipwrecked Spaniards arrived and had troubled with the mutineers, but doesn't give any details, leaving the possibility of a sequel open. So, if you look at this, is the plot and the gist of Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. If you look into the genre, it is an innovator of fictional prose forms, and it is also often credited as the first novel in the English language. It's a long work of prose fiction with an ordinary person for a protagonist and a wealth of lifelike details. So, with this, we finish the analysis of Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. The next thing is, I'll just share the screen. The Henry Fielding. So let me just give you the biography. He's Henry Fielding because we have one of his works, Joseph Andrews by Henry Fieldings, and at the first tune in the first block. So he's basically a novelist and playwright, one of the founders of the English novel, the greatest novelist of the 18th century. And he belongs to an aristocratic family, well educated, a deep knowledge of life. In order to make a living for himself, he began to write plays and farces for the stage. Soon he became one of the most popular playwrights in London. Most of his dramatic works were satiric comedies. Fielding mercilessly exposed the corruption, hypocrisy, and cruelty of the officials. His plays caused fear in the government and aroused hatred of the ruling classes. In 1737, an act appeared according to which plays should be brought under direct censorship. Now, here, after which Fielding could not write plays, and so he ended his career as a playwright and took up the study of law and was made a judge in 1748. Realized that none of his plays would ever gain the approval of Walpole's new governing body. Quit the theatre and entered law school and graduated in 1740. Now began his novel writing by attacking Samuel Richardson. Published his first novel, Joseph Andrews. It's a parody of the best selling novel at the time, Pamela or Virtue Rewarded by Samuel Richardson about a virtuous servant girl. Now, followed by Jonathan Wild the Great, Tom Jones, his masterpiece, and then Amelia, his last novel. And in his novels, Fielding continued to expose and fight against social evils of his time. His later years were devoted to the duties as a magistrate. Now, Fielding is the founder of English realistic novels. He set up the theory of realism in literary creation. The exact observation and study of the real life was the basis of his work. He did not rely simply on his imagination. He did not imitate the characters depicted in the works of earlier authors. He made a close and constant study of real men and women in real life. He gave us genuine pictures of men and women of his own age. His aim as a novelist was to write comic epic in prose. He once described himself as great tattered bard. The comic epic is designed to furnish instruction as well as entertainment. Fielding believed in the educational function of the novel. Now, his major works were Joseph Andrews. This is some novel which is prescribed to us in the first block. And then Jonathan Wild the Great, Tom Jones, Amelia. Joseph Andrews, published in 1741, Fielding's first novel. It's a parody of Richardson's Pamela. What was the intention of this? Was ridiculing Richardson's novel Pamela. The hero of the novel, Joseph Andrews, and Pamela's brother. The situation is contrived by reversing the situation in Pamela. Joseph, a very handsome young boy, is a male servant in Lady Bobby's house. Lady Bobby, attracted by Joseph's charms, pursues him, but Joseph repels her temptation and she's quite angry with him and drives him away. Then Joseph goes to see his sweetheart, a country girl named Fanny. On the way, he's robbed and carried to an inn where he meets Parson Adams, who becomes his good friend. Then the two men travel together and meet with many ridiculous adventures. After overcoming a lot of difficulties, Joseph and Fanny are united. The book turns out quickly a great novel of the comic epic in prose. The subject is the true ridiculous in human nature exposed in all its variety as Joseph and the amiable Quixote. He takes his characters through a series of confusing episodes, finally aligning them with their correct partners in an improved social setting from which the most recalcitrant characters are excluded. The characters, for the most part, have all measured and achieved a greater degree of self knowledge. Thus, the marriage of Fanny to a more experienced Joseph takes place in an ideal setting, the country, and is facilitated by the generosity of an enlightened Mr. Booby. Lady Booby, unchanged and unreformed, returns to London, excluding herself from the society which Fielding has reshaped. Now, if you look into the features of his novels, their authorial narrative voice, Fielding's method of relating a story is telling the story directly by the author. Satire abounds everywhere in Fielding's works. Fielding believed in the educational function of the novel. The object of his novels is to present a faithful picture of life, while sound teaching is woven into their very texture. And his style is easy and familiar, but extremely vivid and vigorous. His sentences are always distinguished by logic and musical rhythm. His command of language is remarkable. Right. Now, before we, finally, I'd like to wind it up by throwing a little light on the summary of um, Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrew. So here it goes. The actual title is The History of the Adventures of Joseph Andrews and of his friend, Mr. Abraham Adams, is what the complete title reads. Now, it's written by Henry Fielding. The story is a comic romance that follows the adventures of Joseph Andrews and Mr. Adams on their return home from England. Through a series of misadventures, the reader becomes privy to the intricacies of each character. Now, Fielding's character development shows a wide range of personalities. Joseph Andrews is created to be a very simple character. He can be described as a deeply virtuous and faithful young man. The Parson Adams is a more developed and complex character. He is a religious figure with a variety of vices, and a fable and scatterbrained older man and a wise and philosophical soul, while Fielding uses his literary repertoire to showcase a variety of characters. He also uses satire to show faults with all levels of English society, from the country lawyer to the aristocratic mistress, and criticize social injustices. He uses the novel as a source of examination on literature and contemporary problems, incorporating thematic structure and religious undertones. Contemporary responses range from the highly negative to the highly positive. His use of satire in a full length novel was exalted, but its application to certain persons, such as clergymen, and was frowned upon. His novel was an overall success and is considered one of the premier examples of literature in line with the age of satire. Looking at the recurring themes in Joseph Andrews, that is, reality versus appearance. Throughout the novel, Joseph Andrews and the other characters struggle with the idea of how exactly they know what they know. The line between face and fiction becomes very blurred, making the two seemingly interchangeable. Now, vanity, where Parson Adams particularly exhibits vanity throughout the novel. It is demonstrated through his belief of his extension amount of knowledge. It is by this knowledge that he judges others and is judged. Now, next uh, theme is like chastity, important or not. Now, Joseph Andrews is so eager to marry Fanny, but is love the sole reason, or is he looking forward to the consummation? Then comes premonition. Now, Linda Hansen's husband dies in a car accident one day, then wakes up the next morning to find him alive and while sleeping next to her. Then the next day, he's dead again. She struggles to figure out what reality is. Throughout, it is like she fights to gather enough evidence to decide whether or not her husband is actually dead. So here we come to an end of this session. Well, so I would request you to kindly go through the material and come prepared with the second block in the next class. So today we are done with the first block of all the 3 units, and tomorrow's class, again from 6 o'clock onwards, we will take up the second block, and I expect you all to come prepared with the material so that if you have any clarifications and doubts, maybe I can clarify. Thank you.